So how did a barefoot shoe perform worse than both a shoe with an elevated heel and actually being barefoot on the ground? And is the whole idea of a barefoot shoe tricking your body into kind of moving as if it's barefoot totally false? Maybe. It might be. Let me tell you about the unexpected results of this study and 5 practical things we can change based on it. Welcome back to the channel where we're exploring different kinds of footwear and how they can make practical differences for us. So what was this crazy study? Well, it took place in August of 2024. It was published by Scientific Reports. I'll link it below. Seems credible. They were trying to measure impact forces on the ankle as you elevate the heel. We actually already know that as you elevate the heel, impact forces on the ankle decrease, just biomechanically, physics, whatever. So not having an elevated heel actually makes you take more impact force in your ankles. And you might be thinking, wait, that means barefoot shoes must put more force on your ankle, right? And yeah, that is true, but we've known that for a while. That's not new. Barefoot shoes have a lot of cool qualities, right? They have benefits to your strength, balance, posture, and they do contribute to foot dynamics closer to being barefoot compared to like a modern shoe. They can even reduce risk of running injury because they encourage a non-rear foot striking running pattern where you're not hitting your heel on the ground really hard basically, which is known to be good. It's good running form, but part of what all this does is it reduces forces on the knee, but it increases forces on the ankle. But once again, we've already known all this. That's not the reason for this video. The reason for this video is that a newer study found something unexpected that we didn't know before. So here's what happened. And I'm just gonna read this. They had 3 different shoes, one with no heel elevation, one with 6mm heel elevation, and one with 20mm heel elevation. They had participants run on a treadmill with a rear foot striking form and compared the impact forces on the ankle in each shoe, as well as totally barefoot on the treadmill as a control group. While elevating the heel more did decrease forces on the ankle, as expected, they found that the forces were somehow higher in the minimal shoe with no heel elevation than just being barefoot. So just to make sure this makes sense, this is like the shoe with no heel elevation. This is 6mm, this is 20mm, and this is the actual barefoot. We can see that the shoe with no heel elevation has higher impact forces than every other shoe, including being barefoot. This wasn't really what they were even checking for, but it was a very interesting result that they specifically noted in their study. It is especially notable that compared to the barefoot condition, even minimal shoes with soles just 6mm thick led to increased frontal plane ankle torques. Thus, while there's abundant evidence that foot dynamics in barefoot running are closer to running in minimal shoes as compared to conventional shoes, our results highlight that there are still salient differences between running barefoot and in minimal shoes, whose consequences may not be completely understood. So just to reiterate that, even if you just totally remove the heel elevation part of the study, if it's just between being barefoot on the ground and wearing minimalist shoes, impact forces are somehow higher in minimalist, like barefoot shoes, basically. What the heck is that about? For people like me who wear shoes like this all the time, that has some serious implications. But we have to be careful because it would be easy to misinterpret these results and miss out on the takeaways that I think could really be helpful to us. So okay, serious implications. What does this actually mean for us? Well, here's what it means to me. I've been walking my dog in my wildling shoes recently, which are pretty much as thin and flat as you can get in a shoe. And I've been thinking, yeah, this is closer to being barefoot than any other shoe probably, but I still don't feel like my feet are moving exactly like they would if I was truly barefoot. I just can't totally avoid walking like I have a shoe on. My feet aren't as careful and certain as they would be if they were just actually directly on the ground. So, to me, the results of this study verify that you can't totally avoid the effects of shoes on your feet, on the movement of your feet, even in the most minimal barefooty shoes. Wearing any kind of shoe at all seems to affect the movement of your feet and how you put force on them. And while barefoot shoes may replicate being barefoot more closely, they're still far enough away that there are noticeable and potentially negative differences. At the very least, in the situation that they studied here, and I would be tempted to believe maybe in other situations as well. But this idea makes total sense to me. Wearing barefoot shoes, I think I'm easier on my feet. I still don't think I'm able to walk as if I'm not wearing shoes, because I am wearing shoes. And apparently that may lead to being a little harder on them. This might partly help explain why so many people, even in my comments, have these anecdotal stories of having a hard time switching to barefoot shoes, like having pain or whatever it is. And I think this raises serious questions about one of the fundamental qualities of barefoot shoes. And no, I don't actually think it's about heel elevation, even though that's specifically what they're looking at here. But they only recorded data on participants that were running with a heel striking form. And like we talked about, that's not really how you're supposed to run, and it's not the way that barefoot shoes specifically are suited to encourage you to run, on like your forefoot or your midfoot. So I don't think the study has told us anything new about that really. What I do think this suggests is that barefoot shoes might contribute to being a little bit harder on your feet than being just barefoot on the ground, in currently unpredictable ways that we don't understand, right? So to me, this raises questions about the most already controversial quality of barefoot shoes: cushioning. Really minimal under the foot cushioning. The idea of minimal cushioning, often less than 8 millimeters between your foot and the ground, is to provide greater flexibility and give your foot maximum feedback from the ground with a minimal thin sole. And both of these things play a big part in enabling the foot dynamics like as if you're barefoot. But like we just talked about, they might not do that quite as well as we thought they did, or at least as I thought they did. So my question is, if I want my feet to be as strong and healthy as possible while having to wear shoes, but it's unavoidable that my feet might have to endure greater impact forces, should I account for that by providing my foot with a little bit more forgiveness, with some degree of cushioning? There are so many other beneficial qualities of barefoot shoes. Maybe there's room for more variability in the cushioning department. And maybe this sounds really obvious to most people, but I think this has been oversimplified. And I'm not saying that we should totally throw this whole idea out the window and just stop caring about cushioning altogether. I still think avoiding over cushioning a shoe is important. Flexibility in a shoe, having less squish, and enabling that sensory feedback from the ground still seems like a very good thing to me. I love how it feels to interact with the world more closely through your feet, and I don't love how too bulky of a shoe feels. Like, I personally don't really love wearing my Ultra Lone Peaks, which have a 25 millimeter stack height. I feel like you can have enough cushioning while still maintaining some degree of minimalism with how much there is. But my understanding of kind of the sweet spot and level of cushioning, I think, has shifted. Maybe there's a lot of cases where super minimal cushioning would actually be worse. So then, okay, this is a lot of general stuff, but how can I actually apply this, right? Well, here they are. Here are the 5 practical things that I would suggest we consider thinking about and changing. Number 1, identify your sweet spot. Take a look at all your shoes and really consider which ones you tend to like wearing the most, especially in terms of how your feet feel on top of the ground. And now use that as a reference for kind of ballpark level of cushioning for the shoes that you wear going forward in general. For instance, I'm finding that I like how 8 to 10 millimeters of stack height feels better than more like 6 to 8 millimeters, or I just have erred on the more minimal side before, but I might lean into that 8 to 10 millimeter range more so. What is that? Oh. Number 2, have mercy on harder days. Consider giving your feet a bit more cushioning on days where you're standing or walking on really hard surfaces for a long time. Surfaces. For example, when I was traveling last weekend, instead of wearing like my most minimal shoes like I've done before, I chose to wear this Zero Wind shoe, which have just a little bit more cushioning and probably have my favorite level of cushioning in any of my shoes right now. And anyway, that was a great call and it felt better, it worked great.
Hi, good morning. I'm realizing I don't think the stack height is the big difference between these two shoes. There's technically barely any difference apparently. So I think it must be that white layer of foam in the Zero Wind versus just kind of the rubber. So the materials definitely play into the amount of cushioning you feel, and that might be something that I have to get into in another video.
Number 3, let the dogma die. If you've been wearing super thin shoes for a long time and your feet still kind of hurt, don't brute force it thinking that it's just gonna be good for you. We don't know that. That's what I feel like this is showing us. We don't really know that that is gonna be good for you in the long run. Also on that, maybe be careful what you're recommending to others. I know I'm gonna be emphasizing level of cushioning less overall when I'm talking to people about, what kind of shoes to get. That's kind of what I'm doing right now in this video. Number 4, bring the insoles back out. Are there any shoes that you can reintroduce cushioning to? This might just be me, but I take the insoles out of a lot of my shoes, like these Zero 360s, which I think makes them more like 6 millimeters, maybe 7. But regardless, I might put the insoles back in these bad boys. And it might actually make them last a little bit longer too. It definitely will, actually, which is a nice benefit for the really minimal shoes. And 5, be intentional about the really thin shoes. If you're getting shoes with a really shallow stack height, know why you're doing that, right? I would say for lifting, they're still probably the best choice. Just getting to stand directly on the ground while you're squatting or driving force. Or maybe if you're getting them just for leisure wear, right? Short walks around the block with your dog, or just kind of chilling, wearing them around. These are both great uses, I think, for a super minimal shoe, right? You probably don't need more cushioning. But I would just say know why you're getting them. So that's at least all of the stuff that I'm gonna be doing, based on what we currently know. But what don't we know still? As stated in the study, there are still salient differences between running barefoot and in minimal shoes whose consequences may not be completely understood. Most obviously, we don't know if the results of the study are isolated to just running with a rear foot strike on a treadmill, on a hard surface, right? I would be really interested to see if there are similar results with more force on the ankle when running with a forefoot strike or just walking in a barefoot shoe compared to just barefoot on the ground. Just honing in on the differences between the two. We also still don't know why minimalist shoes affect forces on the body differently, and exactly what the long-term consequences of any of those differences might be. We also don't know if less cushioning might still be better on softer surfaces than just a flat treadmill. That very well might be the case. But if you leave this video with one thing, let it be this. Barefoot shoes can somehow lead to increased forces on the foot and ankle compared to being actually barefoot on the ground. They are not the same. We don't fully understand this right now, but I think being careful about when and why you forego cushioning is a good idea. Instead of making minimal possible cushioning the default, maybe default to a little bit more moderate of a level, and then be specific about why you drop the cushioning for certain shoes. I think this study is actually really exciting because it is just one of many coming out that help us improve on our shoes and the choices that we're making about them. Check out this video where I tried out the Ultra shoes, right? Or this video about that Zero Wind shoe that has kind of my sweet spot level of cushioning. Both good choices. Choose your path.